I'm Marc, I'm the founder of 51 Ventures and Dematerialized, and I talk today about Web3. That's a new technology, the third iteration of the web, which enables user-owned internet, taking back data from big platforms to users. And it has also, of course, overlaps with AI, because with AI it becomes possible to produce content at scale, generic content, and the blockchain, Web3 NFTs enable to clarify ownership and clarify who produced what. So Web3 is really important also for brands. It's a big opportunity, and it will change the way how people transact and interact with other in the internet. So welcome to Web3 plus AI. What's next? I will mainly talk about Web3, and then in the end I will talk a little bit about AI and how those two things are connected to each other. I'm Marc. I'm the founder of 51 Ventures. It's a company that advises other brands entering Web3. I've worked at Bitcoin Suisse for the last 4.5 years. I led the marketing and communications at Bitcoin Suisse. So to start right off, that's a picture of Punk 6529. Who of you is familiar with such a CryptoPunk? Okay, so quite about 50% of you. That's the punk who spoke at NFT Paris 2 weeks ago. He held a speech there, and he's one of the most famous punks out there, and it's currently worth about $500,000, that image. And now we're going to talk about why that is and how a JPEG image can be worth that much. So beyond the JPEG, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that. Maybe some are less familiar, how this all came together and what we now eventually call Web3. I will just start at the very beginning and go very quickly through it. So we all know the World Wide Web. It basically helped us to democratize information. And what does that mean? Democratize information. I have a JPEG, as we all know it, which I very much like. So I sent that through Hotmail to my mother. Then it's not only on my server, but also on the server of Hotmail. She likes that so much that she sends that to a further friend, and that friend uploads it to MySpace, and then it's on their server, and so it continues and continues, and that picture duplicates. And in the end, the question is, what is the original? And if we can't tell what is the original, what does that JPEG even value? And in the real world, we know that very well. So we have one picture of Mona Lisa. Everyone can copy it. You can even copy it that well that an average person doesn't see whether it's the original or not. But if you look closely, you can discern it, and you will realize that only one person can actually own the original. So how do we take this concept into the digital space? And that's where Bitcoin and Ethereum comes in, as you all know it. Bitcoin made that with value, and later Ethereum came along and made that with files. For example, JPEGs. So going back, that was really the start of what we call today Web3. I'm aware there are a lot of definitions out there at the moment of what it really is, but that's certainly one of the key aspects. It's that it enables ownership, it enables scarcity, it enables something to be unique, original, and also of value. So let's dive a little bit deeper into Web3 and what's happening at the moment out there. So here again, a statement that describes what Web3 actually is, and this is for me the two key things that it enables. It enables more privacy, but also monetization through ownership. Ownership of data, ownership of whatever you do in the internet. And that's also something you've probably seen a lot of times already. And here I don't want to talk about everything, but mainly about the right side. And as you can see, the main revolution of that third iteration is that you can own actual stuff. You can own files instead of platforms owning them. So when we talk about Web3, it's not only a technology, it's also a cultural movement. It's born out of the crypto movement, and crypto is born out of a libertarian movement. And that thought, that libertarian thought, is very much present in Web3 as well, because in the end, it's about decentralizing the platforms that centralized the internet in the last 15 years, like Instagram or Twitter or all the other platforms that we know, and taking back ownership and control of your own data. And that's a cool example from Andreessen Horowitz. They like to bring when it comes to monetization. And here you can see there's a big difference in Web2 platforms versus Web3 platforms in terms of take rates, or what creators can actually earn through their data and intellectual property. And here I put together an overview of how I see the Web3 space at the moment and the different actors that are playing in that space. You see in the middle, there's a big Web3 mass market. We already heard yesterday billions of dollars in Web3, NFTs, metaverse. We'll talk about later how those three things are different from each other, but it's a huge market and everyone wants to enter. Now you have the degens on the right bottom, who are kind of the early guys who entered Web3. They are playing with NFTs, they're playing with profile pictures, they are living in those communities, on those discords. They're very deep down into the space. And then you have the creators, IP owners. Those are the big collections that actually create intellectual property. Here an example of doodles or art blocks or Yuga Labs. Yuga Labs owns the CryptoPunks, they own the Bored Apes, very famous collections within the space. And they create intellectual property, they create art that people then own and trade and experience. And then you have the commercial brands. I will talk a lot more about what they are doing now in the space later, but they are entering the space now, and they are seeing the opportunity of that, and they are also trying to enter the mass market. And then you have the builders. So everyone who builds on Ethereum layer 1 or layer 2, Optimism, Arbitrum, improves scalability and all that. And I would say, even though Web3 is a very juicy promise at the moment, it's still very early stage. So when you actually hang out in those rooms and in those communities, it's still a lot about GM, GN, good morning, good night. So everyone comes in those spaces, writes that into the channel. It's a lot of trash talk, WAGMI, we're all going to make it, all those sayings of those communities and cults within Web3, and a lot of flipping as well. So a lot of trading going on, people speculating on certain collections. They're not buying it because they find it interesting. They're not buying it because they want to join a community. They just want to make money. And they're very tribal as well. So when you go to the typical NFT conference, you would have here the D-Gods, you would have the Pudgy Penguins, you'd have the Moonbirds, the Clonexes, and everyone feels part of a certain community and identifies with that community. So I would say that's the current state of Web3, and there's much more to come, but yeah, let's see what the brands are doing. So when we have a look at the brands, what does Web3 and ownership in the internet actually enable? It enables collectability, it enables access to certain experiences, it enables belonging, it enables self-expression, identity, status. I can suddenly own a digital luxury item and feel part of something and feel good about it, have a certain status within a community. I can participate in something that's maybe token gated, and also very important, I can transfer it to someone else. So if I earn something within a brand ecosystem, I can then transfer it out and sell it and earn for my participation. And that's what Reto mentioned yesterday. I had a look at the top 100 brands of the Interbrand top 100 list, and almost 40% now entered Web3 already. Most of them entered with NFT projects, and most of them failed. Failed means they didn't gain any traction. They just released a project. Most of them did it out of marketing purposes to just surf the wave and be there as well. But yeah, just not many succeeded. And here's also what happened last year. It's really a huge boom. Every brand tries to enter the market now and tries to experiment and find out how can that actually work for me as a brand and within my brand ecosystem. And that's a very famous example and a very early example of a big brand who entered the space, which is Adidas. And they did a partnership with the Bored Apes franchise and released Bored Ape Adidas clothes. That was so successful when you look at how those items are actually traded. They were traded a lot at the beginning, and then the engagement just stalled. And that's what you can see with most of the projects at the moment. They have high engagement at the beginning, and then it falls down. Another quite a good example is Reddit. Reddit took exactly the opposite approach of Adidas. So they didn't partner with a existing Web3 community. They didn't use marketing lingo, Web3 lingo when they entered the space. They tried to do everything without even mentioning NFT, without even mentioning blockchain, because they knew their community hates NFTs. Redditors hate NFTs. And so they tried to do it all without that lingo, and they succeeded very much in that. When you look at the numbers, they have now created over 7 million unique wallets, and the engagement is still very high because they do continuous drops. They just had a recent one with the Super Bowl, and yeah, that was quite successful as well. So what does that mean? A Reddit collectible, it's just an avatar for Redditors that they can use on their profiles. So yeah, why Web3 for brands? All those brands, they hope, of course, that they generate some kind of revenue, they create some kind of loyalty and some kind of engagement with that. But as I said, most of them so far failed to do so. If you look at the revenue numbers, here's a list of the top brands according to revenue generated within Web3. And what's very interesting is that Nike is by far the most successful company, and they have also by far the most secondary volume. Second place for secondary volume is Adidas, and the others are just basically neglectable. Also, it's really difficult to build something successful within Web3 that creates a lot of engagement over time as well. And why is that so? Because it's hard to build. So it's not as simple anymore as 10 years ago, where you would just hire an Instagram team and have a social media strategy. You have to hire a community engagement manager. You have to build smart contracts, you have to hire UX designers, you have to know the different communities, and that altogether is very complex for brands. And then there's a second challenge, and that challenge is that Web3 does not work like Web2. It's very much built on communities. And every brand who enters Web3, they need to have a complete mind shift in how they approach that. It's not anymore like we build a product and we market that and try to increase sales, but it's about building communities and then building together with those communities something that everyone has value from. And that's exactly what Marc Mathieu says. It's a big paradigm shift, and the difficulty is for those big brands to...
Mark,
yeah?
a little question on this, very important in my view. What does it mean, co-beneficiaries? Does it go that you become shareholder in that?
Yeah, that's okay. Also it's actually like becoming a shareholder. Also, I have another slide later where I say it's not anymore about creating shareholder value, it's about creating community value. And community value means that the community profits from whatever you do with that project. And that, of course, also then opens questions about regulations. I will also talk later about that. Yeah. Yeah, and then another challenge is UX. So here's an example of National Geographic. They did a recent token drop a few weeks ago, and I tried to participate in that, and I had to click 35 times. I had to go through a KYC process. I had to verify a code sent to my email and copy-paste it over twice. And then I could buy an NFT with my credit card or wallet. And I already had a wallet, so I knew how that all goes, and I'm familiar with private keys and everything. But imagine if you're a normal Web2 user, you don't know what wallets are, you don't know what private keys are, you don't have a clue why you need that. It's just super difficult at the moment, and the UX is not at the point where it's ready for mass market. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what's next and also the challenges that are coming up. First one I just talked about, that's UX. And that's what the builders are doing at the moment. There's a lot of... still see it? Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of going on in terms of new wallets, in terms of usability, easier sign-up processes. Companies like WebAuth or Magic Link who try to bridge that process of creating wallets, making that much easier so that the user doesn't even notice that they create private keys, things like this. Then utility, also a big challenge for brands. How do brands go beyond just an NFT drop into something that's much more connected to their brand ecosystem, that has much more utility in it? Then new business models, regulation, of course. So what does it mean if an NFT holder participates in the increasing value of an NFT? It's currently not clear how NFTs are regulated, and a lot of brands are hesitant to enter the space because they don't know how that will turn out. New marketing paradigms, so from transactional marketing to community marketing. Then the creators, IP owners, they think about how can they expand their brand franchise. Now that we've created those Pudgy Penguins and we have a loyal following and we have those NFTs, how can we expand that much beyond the Web3 space into the physical world? That's what Pudgy Penguins is doing at the moment. They're partnering with toy producers. They want to build a whole franchise out of it. Doodles announced just their version 2. They also want to build a content franchise out of Doodles. So those are the big moves from the creator side. And on the Degen side, I would say the big challenge is how are those communities how do they become much more professional? And then, in the end, also one of the big opportunities I see is analytics, because now you have all those Web3 users with those NFTs in their wallets, and you know exactly what dApps they are connected to, you know exactly what NFTs they hold, you know where they interact with, you have a lot of information about those wallets, and that you can use to target them again. And there are also a lot of companies building at the moment for solutions that analyze and track those communities and target them later on. And here again, a very interesting statement about community building together with the community. So that's the Web3 lead of Adidas. It's not about working anymore with the Yeezys of the world, but really finding people from the community and building together with them, and hopefully making one of them become one of the next Yeezys. And that's what I said before. And here also a big statement, an important statement of the current state. Really, it's going. It's about going beyond the next NFT drop and really integrating NFTs into a brand ecosystem that has value for the end users. And now the big picture. And here is also how that all connects to AI eventually, and that's also what Daniel Diemers talked about yesterday. So when we look at Web3, it's a big paradigm shift on about how we connect and transact with each other. We can suddenly own things. We can suddenly transact things on the internet. It's a shift away from central platforms, powerful platforms, back to the users. It's a shift from physical to virtual. So a lot of things now suddenly can have value in the virtual space. It's not only that our lives become increasingly more virtual and that the younger generation spends time in Roblox and metaverses and whatever virtual worlds. It's also that we can own stuff and that suddenly can have value. And then in IP development, which means that users can now co-create. They can create and participate in the success of a project, and they can own stuff. And that's eventually how it all connects. So you have those new immersive interfaces, you have Web3, which enables ownership, and then you have AI, which creates a proliferation of new content. And that's what I call the metaverse. And I know there are about 100 different definitions of that. And we heard a different definition yesterday from Daniel Diemers. But that's my vision for the metaverse, connecting Web3, immersive interfaces and AI. And why AI? Let's have a very quick look in the end at what that actually does. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the recent tools that came on the market, whether it's visual AI or whether it's text-based AI. Yesterday, just GPT-4 got released, so that's very exciting. But here is an example of Midjourney. It's one of the tools with which you can create AI images. And those images I created about 2 months ago, and here's an example of Barack Obama. The prompt I used there was Barack Obama, face emotional, highly detailed, photorealistic, tattoo, wrinkles, beard. And then here's an example of Kate Moss. And the prompt there was Kate Moss, open skin, shoulders, smoking, studio lighting, contour lighting, uniform dark background, photorealistic detail, focal length 2, f2, focal length 70 millimeters. And does somebody recognize this person? Picasso. Yes. It's Picasso. The prompt there was Pablo Picasso, skin, natural, contour light, studio lighting, uniform dark background, photorealistic detail, focal length 70 millimeters. And the last one is Donald Trump.
You didn't want to ask if anybody knew.
Yeah. And here the prompt was Donald Trump, skin, natural, contour light, studio lighting, uniform dark background, photorealistic detail, focal length 70 millimeters.
None of them look happy. What's wrong?
Yes. I also noticed that, and I on purpose, for sure, if you would put into the prompt smiling, it would change. But the default state was always kind of an unhappy expression. That was interesting. But what's really impressive is that you can look at that face of Donald Trump and you see exactly that expression that you know from him, with those eyes and his view and everything. And that's just, an example. Every one of you can do that. You can go to ChatGPT today or Midjourney and create such images. And now the question is, what does that mean for the internet? And how is that connected to web3? And what I think is we will have a proliferation of generic content. So suddenly everyone can create texts which are fairly good. Suddenly everyone can create images which are fairly artistic and fairly good. And then you will suddenly have the need for curation. So if you have much more content, it will become more important of having people that sort out the better content from the worse content. And then you will have a need for originality, because you can copy everything. It's not, everything becomes copyable, everything becomes doable, but what is actually still original? You need a way to verify that. And then verification identity, and then also closed networks, community belonging. And that's all connected to Web3, because Web3 enables you to prove if something is original. An example is if you have a text from the New York Times, and suddenly you can't verify anymore whether that text was actually created by that journalist or not, because you can just copy it, you can just recreate it with ChatGPT. You need a mechanism to verify which one is the original one. And now there are already teams building on that, for example, with the zero knowledge technology, building tools of how you can implement that on a website like the New York Times, that you can verify if a text is original or a picture is actually the picture that was published by the New York Times. Yes, and closed networks, communities. I think that that's enabled by token-gated communities. If you have those NFTs, you can suddenly have access to certain groups, to certain spaces, and that's also enabled through Web3 and NFTs. Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, let's take the opportunity to ask some questions to Marc. As he mentioned, we had also a presentation yesterday about the metaverse by Dani Diemers. The topic literally the same, but we have seen a different presentation with very many aspects, a bit from a different perspective. And we will then in the later stage discuss also a little bit what the impact is for us and for humanity. Are there some questions to Marc right now?
You said that value will go away from shareholder value to community value. How does that work?
So the big shifts that I said with brands is that when brands enter the Web3 space, they suddenly need to think about how can I create communities and how can I create products that create values for those communities. So those community members, they become a very important stakeholders for those brands. And up to now, I mean, traditional marketing, they didn't market with communities. And they didn't leverage communities. There was very little co-creation going on. If people participated in that, they didn't own anything. And they were just generally less important. Now, if those brands enter Web3, they're building those communities, they build together with them, but the community members also expect to have something in return. And they're becoming almost part of the brand.
Maybe also yesterday I had the pleasure to dive into a business case in the sports data area. And there the sports area creates many data points and also values, and these values are sold, I mean, produced by the sports people, by the athletes, and then sold by third parties. And there is a hell of a lot of value also, and it gives a new sense of ownership. Because we definitely have to think about when we produce so many data, no matter if it's real life or in the metaverse, it is value. And then you think about the value chain, and then you think about who is the owner of the value. And I mean, we have this with the Open Information Society, so the open source activity. For instance, states, they have to disclose information, and there are some smart people gathering the information and selling it for a lot of money. And so that's quite a thing that we have to look a bit differently in the value creation. What I believe, what you mentioned is there are many new opportunities of value creation with Web3. Mm-hmm. And this gives quite also new models of ownership, new models of beneficial. Mm-hmm. Is that summarized?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, sure. Yeah. And one of the statements that comes to my mind is the CEO of Pochi Penguins. That's one of the most famous collections, and he said we really like the muscle, and our community is the brain behind what we do. We just do what our community wants, and we are here to make them happy. And yeah, that's a good example.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. We just jump over to the... Thank you.